Lucifer means, in Gnostic terms, before Christianity, lucis ferro. It means, I bring the light. It's the spirit that brings the light into the world.
For the remainder of his life, Crowley continued his own attempts to spread the light through his magical work. Under dictation from Aiwas, or Lucifer, Crowley completed the Book of the Law, his Bible for a new religion for the post-Christian age. It would be called Thelema, or sometimes Crowleyanity. He even devised a new religious ceremony, a Gnostic Mass.
Thou that art one, our Lord in the universe, the Son, our Lord in ourselves, whose name is mystery of mystery.
But does Crowleyanity have any valuable insight to offer?
Enlightening the world is also the...
Crowley understood quite early in his life that religions have a shelf life. They have a life expectancy, and what is appropriate in one aeon is inappropriate in another. We started off with the tablets of the law, which were broken. In their place was put the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, the harsh commandments, thou shalt not, suitable for children. Don't stick your fingers in the electric sockets, don't play with the fire. They're children's rules. We've now moved beyond that. The Book of the Law is a charter of universal freedom. It gives every individual, every man and every woman on this planet rights. And we're now grown up enough, I believe, to actually exercise those rights and to take responsibility for our own actions.
O lion and O serpent that destroy the destroyer, be mighty among us. Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Its main precept, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, was frequently misunderstood as a justification for selfish and immoral behavior. This was not Crowley's intention, although many people believed that his own personal morality did little to further his cause.
People said, oh, that it's just an excuse for sex and everything. But, I mean, his creed, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law, doesn't just mean go and do anything you like or go and kill people. Or it means find what your true will in this world is and fulfill it, which is, I guess, what most sane people would want to do. And the response to do what thou wilt is love is the law, love under will. So one would say, if you fulfilled that, you're not likely to do anyone any harm, except maybe yourself.
During his lifetime, Crowley remained largely misunderstood. He died in 1947, at the age of 72. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered and lost. But the spirit of Aleister Crowley was set to rise again. In the 1950s, American filmmaker Kenneth Anger began a series of films directly inspired by Crowley's work. Crowley's rebirth as a cultural icon for a restless and rebellious generation was underway. For the counterculture of the 60s, Crowley's work seemed to embody the desire for free expression and for a break with the past. Crowley seemed to have a special appeal for musicians, who saw themselves as the social rebels of rock. He was included amongst the celebrities on the cover of the Beatles' hugely successful Sgt. Pepper album.
20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Lead guitar, Jimmy Page.
Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page took a more serious interest than most. He studied Crowley closely. He collected Crowley's paintings and books. And in 1971, Jimmy Page bought Boleskine House.
Jimmy Page was deeply involved in the occult, or deeply interested perhaps, and he had the money and the time to buy into it, and he apparently had a fantastic, maybe still has, fantastic collection of Crowley memorabilia. But he didn't spend much time at all. And, I mean, you spend all this time and money and you buy the place, and then he didn't bother about it.
Page retained ownership of Boleskine until 1991, but the house was actually lived in and looked after by an old school friend called Malcolm Dent. But surely the effects of the young Crowley's magical work would have cleared Boleskine by now.
I had no idea why he'd bought Boleskine House, the estate. I hadn't ever heard of Aleister Crowley. So arriving at Boleskine and discovering, one, that it has a history and a past, and a pretty weird past at that. Two, that there are certain things still going on there. Three, there are people who will visit the place to experience this and even practice it. And four, that one of my oldest friends seemed to be actively involved one way or another in this. There was a lot of things to sort of take in.
Photographer Doogie Corrance was a personal friend of Malcolm Dent. He often stayed at Boleskine House and also took many photographs there.
Having spent quite a few nights there, I felt very uncomfortable when I went to bed. The lights were out. I would go off to sleep. I always go off to sleep immediately. But I always woke up at 2, 3 in the morning with feeling very uncomfortable. There was a definite feeling of a presence, a very strong presence that was trying to maybe get into you.
Probably one of the first episodes that made the biggest impression on me was sitting in bed or half lying in bed, and something outside the door of my bedroom was snuffling under the door, which it started off as if it was a dog and then became very much more powerful as a sound and as a noise and as an impression, to the extent that I snapped on a light beside the bed and was, well, I have to confess, very, very frightened, because it became extremely noisy and as if the door was going to come through. But I had a feeling as to what the creature was, and it was huge and very, very evil. And I was very, very frightened. Crowley, when he was raising the various demons and spirits at Boleskine, failed to banish all of them back from whence they came, and that 1 or 2 residues had been left behind. And he actually mentions that he had left this one bricked up, in, as he put it, in the centre of Boleskine House. The room I was in that night was the centre of Boleskine House. Why didn't we go mad? Why didn't we run out screaming our heads off? We wouldn't allow that to dominate our existence or our lives. Boleskine House was essentially a family house where a family was living, having as good a time as it could as a family, and attempting to blossom as a family. You had to acknowledge that somebody would come in from outside and have some incredible